Welcome to Withdraw Consent. I'm Jack. This is Victor. Let's talk Ukraine.
So, Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, waving Ukrainian flag has been a huge deal over the last, it's been a year already? I feel like
Over you.
yeah, it's just incredible. So we wanted to talk about why are why are we waving the flag? Why are we told to wave the
Why
flag?
are people waving the flag?
Yes.
I'm not.
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, and why is this important? What's really going on? So it's gonna be a bit of a history lesson. We're just gonna talk about the overall subject, and in the end, see if waving the Ukrainian flag is something you.
And in the end, I'm going to ask our viewer, what would you do if you were Putin?
Okay.
What would you do? Let's see.
From his point of view.
From his point of view.
So in 2004, someone named Yanukovych won an election there. There was
In the Ukraine.
In the Ukraine, and is it prime minister? Was that the position then, or was it?
I don't know.
So he won this election. There was a lot of corruption, and people thought it wasn't a good election, so they redid it. And he ends up losing. So he ends up being attached to, corruption and that type of thing. 6 years later, he has reformed his image. People are now trusting him again.
And is he pro-U.S. or?
He's, well, as we're going to see, he's totally open to asking the U.S. for help and that type of thing, but he's also willing to go to Russia as well.
And he's a born Russian speaker.
Okay, gotcha.
Right.
So in 2010, he's reformed his image. He runs again and wins. So now he's running Ukraine, and after a couple of years, they're going through a lot of economic hardships, and they need money. And they go to the U.S. U.S. can't be bothered, doesn't give them the money, and he's still trying to help his people. So he then approaches Russia, and Russia was willing to loan them $15 billion and also supply gas, like natural gas. And the U.S. was fine with them just, going the way of the whatever, and, just degrading as a country. But once they asked Russia for help, now the U.S. was now interested because, we're enemies or whatever, that type of thing.
And I want to...
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to insert in here, why is the Ukraine so important? Because it's the last country sitting between Russia and NATO. NATO is a defensive pact saying if any NATO members get attacked, all others have to declare war. And it was to protect Europe from the USSR. Then the USSR disbanded in the 90s. And then NATO promised they wouldn't let any member nations in east of where they were currently at. Then they let all the nations east of where they were at in violation of their word to Russia. And now there's one country left, the borderlands. It's Ukraine sitting in between NATO, right?
Okay,
in
Russia, right.
In between NATO and Russia. And so this is very important. Like Russia will go to, I'm guessing, nuclear war with NATO if Ukraine becomes a NATO member. Okay. Because I feel like it's that important.
The enemy's getting real close to your gates at that point.
Right.
It's a buffer zone kind of right now.
And so for the U.S., the Ukraine doesn't matter in the least bit. We're not scared about our national security, but Russians are in fear of their national security because of the situation there.
So what do you think was the U.S.'s issue with Russia helping them?
We're just terrible, and we don't want anybody else to increase their power. But the problem is, so the world used to be divided into spheres of influence. And you had great powers, and each great power had a sphere of influence. And when it came to any lesser powers in their sphere of influence, that one was the arbiter of what happened, right?
Okay.
So, for example, Germany was a great power, and England was a great power. Well, England colonized India, so India was under their sphere of influence. If something happened, a revolution, a protest, a revolt, a civil war in India, Germany can't say, oh, we got something. Shut your mouth. It's not your sphere of influence. This is English sphere of influence.
Okay.
They're a great power and nobody else. And so the United States was a great power. And we said, I believe it was the Monroe Doctrine. And we said our sphere of influence is North and South America. So if there's a problem, this is back in the day, there's a problem in Brazil, Chile, wherever. Spain can't come say, oh, we got something. Shut your mouth. It's not your sphere of influence, Okay. And so in this exact situation, Ukraine is Russia's sphere of influence.
It's definitely not ours.
And it's definitely not NATO's, because if Ukraine is NATO's sphere of influence, and it could be, I mean, it's right next to Poland, then what is Russia's sphere of influence?
Just Russia.
Name me one place, right? And if you try to take away, like, for example, when we had the Monroe Doctrine, and then say the French want to come in and say, no, we're the bosses of Brazil now. That means war, because you're coming into our sphere of influence,
Right.
you know? And in this situation with Ukraine, it's clearly in Russia's sphere of influence, because keep in mind, it's hard to say, but Russia's not trying to expand to Ukraine.
Right.
Russia's trying to stop NATO from expanding to Ukraine. But go ahead and continue.
So is Ukraine full of like ethnic Russians?
It's halfskis is what it is.
Oh.
It's in the east, they're ethnic Russians.
Okay.
And in the west, they're ethnic Ukrainians. In the east, they speak Russia. In the west, they speak Ukrainian.
Is there like conflict and stuff between the two groups within Ukraine?
Right. Well, then that's where we get to the story, though.
Okay.
But like we got to cover the revolution before we get to the story.
Okay. Yeah. Go for the revolution.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'll just talk about that conflict briefly.
Okay.
So there's a region called the Donbass region.
Okay.
And they're all Russian speakers, and they got treated really bad by the Ukrainians. So they started fighting for their freedom. So they were freedom fighters, but to the Ukrainian, they're terrorists because they're not, accepting the boot and licking it enough, we'll say. And so then there was conflict in the Donbass region. Okay. So then it came to 2014, and we had the Maidan Revolution. And what happened is the United States came. The United States wanted to get Yanukovych out so they could put in a pro-Western president, prime minister, whatever. And so we sent our agencies in, and we incited a color revolution. And that revolution succeeded enough to get Yanukovych out. I got to read it.
Yeah.
And so what we do in all governments around the world is we insert our leaders and just do terrible things. Because you got to understand that Yanukovych was voted in. And so the will of the Ukrainian people was to go that way. And now we're now imposing a leadership in Ukraine that's against the will of the Ukrainian people.
So there was a rebellion though in
14.
Okay, so it wasn't the Ukrainian people rising up against the pro-Russia guy?
Yeah, it was. It's the same way that the Libyan people rose up against Gaddafi. So the Libyan people didn't rise up against Gaddafi. The United States imported religious extremists from Islam, right? Funded them, weaponized them, and led the revolt by the Libyan people against that dang Gaddafi, who was going to try to print his own money. Don't do that or the U.S. government will kill you. And so when you look at it, are they Ukrainians? Yeah, they are. But
this was not a homegrown movement.
Right. It's like in the United States, if you took a camp of 100 white supremacists or 100 black nationalists, and then the United States gave them, surface-to-air missiles and this and that, you're like, oh, the American people are rising up by shooting down airliners, military, whatever they're doing. It's not the American people. It's a tiny fraction being funded by the bad guys, the American government or the system, And so the United States then worked with dissidents to give them a disproportionate representation in the Maidan Revolution to go against the will of the Ukrainian people. And then Yanukovych is out and Poroshenko's in.
Okay.
And he's pro-West. And he's going to be in from 2014, and he's going to be until 2019 until we see Zelensky, who we're all very familiar with. And so what happens is the fighting intensifies in the Donbass region, okay?
But now we're back in 2015. 14?
Yeah, 14.
Okay.
Yeah, we're in 14. And so now Poroshenko's in, and he's pro-West. So he knows the pro-Russian people are going to be mad that he's in.
Okay.
So he's going to have to try to bring peace to his land. So he starts doing these meetings in Minsk with the Russian rebels but they're not from Russia. They're just ethnic Russians.
Okay, living in the Ukraine.
They're Ukrainians,
Okay.
right, who are ethnic Russians. And So then they do these Minsk protocols, they're called. And this was in 2014. So this was the first one was the 5th of September. And they say, hey, we're going to stop the fighting. And then they come to a variety of deals that they're going to stand down. They've got like a buffer zone and then heavy weapons and this whole thing. And then the Ukrainians don't listen to that. So Poroshenko makes that Minsk protocol, but the Ukrainian military continues to do what they're doing. And the rebels continue then to do what they're doing. And it doesn't really solve anything. So they come back to Minsk the next year and they do Minsk 2. So this is 12th of February, 2015. And then they promise the rebels, we're going to reform the Ukrainian government. We're going to do all this heavy. Fighting continues. So it lessens. It did help. It lessens. And then the fighting continues. Okay. So from the period of Minsk 2, February 2nd, 2015. Oh, I'm sorry. 12th of February. Okay. We're now going to fast forward 7 years.
Okay.
Okay. So there's 7 years of Ukrainians killing Russians at their homes, because keep in mind, their artillery is going into the
Russian portion.
The Russian portion, correct. And so, like I had said at the beginning of the video, like, what would you do? You're Putin.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not going to say Biden. You're the president of the United States.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say Trump either. You're the president of the United States. And say a region of Mexico. Okay. So northern Mexico, which only Americans live in. Right?
In this hypothetical
scenario. Hypothetical situation. Yeah. This northern region, only Americans live in there. There's white people, there's black people, they speak English, they have McDonald's, you know? And I know that's a weak representation of our culture. But anyways, and then they're getting shelled by the Mexicans, by the actual ethnic Mexicans, because they're all Mexicans. Those Americans are Mexican citizens. And they're getting shelled after the Mexicans promised not to, and then they get shelled for 7 years. What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Well, I mean, at some point, they're your people, and you should stand up for them, you think.
Right. And so, if you say Putin's wrong for standing up for his ethnic Russians, I would have said, okay, Minsk protocols, okay? The next day, shells land. And I'll say, cool, I'll give you 24 hours to stop her. I'm sending the entire Russian military and I'm going to destroy every bit of you. You don't hurt my people. He gave them 7 years. That's an amazing constraint, you know? Because if you know something about Putin, he loves money.
Okay.
He loves his Russian people. He really, truly does. He loves his Russian culture. He cares about the rampant alcoholism. He cares about the low birth rates. Like, he really loves his people. And you could say he's misguided and he's corrupt and, you know, he's worth all this money, but he also loves money, you know? So then we have this current conflict. So this is 7 years later. So now it's 2022 and it's the 21st of February. And Putin says, hey, you know what? I recognize the DPR and the LPR, which are the governments of the Donbass region, those two areas in the Donbass region. He's like, I recognize them as free now.
Free being they're no longer part of the Ukraine? Like that type of thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because they're claiming we're free. We're not Russia. We're free. We're Russians. You know, we're ethnic Russians, but we're free people and we shouldn't be ruled by these people. Okay, let me tell you how the world works. Just because lots of people haven't read books, we'll say. Okay, here's how this works. There's the law of self-determination. Okay. The law of self-determination has ruled humankind for eons, we'll say, if I can exaggerate. And it is just simply this. The ethnic group of a particular region gets to determine their destiny. That's all there is to it. So if a minority in a country wants to rule the destiny of the majority can elect and say, we're no longer a part of that body. So in this situation, since they're ethnically Russian, they have the ultimate right to choose what country they belong to. We can go back to World War II, and it was the same thing. So Hitler was making these demands. He had this plan when he got elected. It was reunification of the Greater Reich, right? But he's justified in doing so as long as he does so peacefully, because the regions he wants to reabsorb into the Greater Reich are ethnic Germans.
That were lost from World War One?
Yeah, that were removed from World War One. So when he says, hey, I want this area back, and everybody kind of looks and they're like, I mean, there's nothing we can, they're Germans. They're Germans, you know? And it's not like they were, see, what they could have done if they wanted to dismantle Germany in an efficient way after World War One is what you got to do is you got to make new countries out of those regions. Do you see?
Instead of adding them to existing ones.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So you take one area and you got Germany, and then you got the Sudetenland, the South land below it, right? And it's just a region of Germany, right? And below that's Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
What they did is they took the Sudetenland, which has a series of mountains, so it's a defensive between the two areas, and they said that's now part of Czechoslovakia. Well, the problem is when any German leader says, no, we want the Sudetenland back. Okay, I guess so. But if you had taken the Sudetenland and made it its own country, you know, it's like you could make an ally with that country, you know, but you can't just absorb another country. Because even like when Hitler invaded France, he didn't absorb any of France. It was still France. It was just occupied France, and he made a deal with the Vichy France, which is the southern government. So all I'm saying, though, is that by the laws of the way that humans work, for eons past, these people get to choose. They get to legitimately choose. And one of the problems of this whole conflict is that at no point has the Ukrainian government been in charge of the Ukrainian military.
Oh.
So
they just do what they want?
Yeah, they do what they want.
Oh.
So they got this, you know, like they got their Azov battalion with the Nazis in it, and they were down there fighting. And so when they did the Minsk protocols and then Minsk II the year later, it was the intent of the Ukrainian government to stop the conflict and have peace with Russia. Because remember, Poroshenko came in and he wanted to take steps towards Russia just to appease his ethnic Russian inhabitants of Ukraine, or Ukrainians, you know. And so he ordered them to stop, but they didn't stop. And the next year he ordered them to stop, and then they stood down some. So then when Zelensky comes in charge, he says, I'm going to stop that. So there's 2019 now, 3 years before the war. And so Zelensky was 2015 to 2019, or 2014, I'm sorry, after the Maidan Revolution to 2019. And he comes in and says, hey, I'm going to stop them. I'm going to stop this whole conflict. So he orders his Azov battalion, Nazi guys, whatever. Not all of them are Nazis, but pretty Nazi-fied. And he orders them to stop attacking, and they just don't. Right? And so, like, what can Russia do? They can't make a deal with the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government's honestly on board with peace in the Donbass region. But the Ukrainian government's incapable of ordering their own military.
So is there any word that comes out of the Ukrainian military about what they want or anything? Or it's just...
I don't know the answer to that. I know that they want to retain the Donbass region.
Okay.
And I feel like it's like a sunk cost fallacy. Like you're so many years into this fight, right. You can't, it's similar generals who have been there, you know, you can't just tuck your tail and run. You've committed so much to this. So many people have died that you've, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was 21st of February, 2022 that he recognized them. And then the next day Putin made a statement saying that nothing remains of the Minsk agreements. Because nothing remains of the Minsk agreements, obviously. And then 2 days later, which is the 24th of February, 2022, he invaded. And does he sound wrong? What do you think?
It seems reasonable. I know if I was living in that area, I would want help. You know, if I was getting shelled by the Ukrainians.
Right. You'd pray for help every night.
Right. It would seem like it. I mean, all you've known is war for 7 years.
Well, even before that. Because the war went before the Minsk. The Minsk was in 14.
Yeah.
The first Minsk. And then before that, they were even fighting. Yeah. And so it's like you're in a situation where literally you pray every night that your kids don't get a bomb dropped on them.
Right.
You know? Or your wife when you're like, Yeah, and so Russia was put at a complete impasse because they couldn't. There was no negotiation available,
Right.
and at the same time, they're talking about letting Ukraine into the NATO, which would be disastrous for Russia. And so, I'm not saying the Russians are the good guys. I'm not saying they're the bad guys. I'm not saying Ukrainians are the good guys or bad guys. Honestly, all I'm saying though is that I wouldn't wave a Russian flag, honestly.
Yeah, so I got questions. So all this fighting that's been going on, I feel like I never heard about it ever. That
Oh, right.
like how is that? That's incredible to me.
Yeah, because the news is so curated. You know, like
Okay.
how many news reports do you see on Yemen? We're in Yemen right now.
Okay.
We're off in Yemen with our allies Al Qaeda, working to defeat the government that the people of Yemen want.
Oh,
That's what we're doing in Yemen. You're not going to hear about it right now, but you may hear about it in a couple years when we make a video about how this whole thing started and it's been going on since 20, whatever. I just make up number 18, you know?
okay.
Then you'll hear a video about it.
Wow.
But I'm just saying, and I'm not even saying, hey, you should be up to everything on Yemen. But if something does happen in Yemen and you want to fly the flag of Yemen, you should be up on it at that point.
Right.
And so another thing that occurred here is that the Russians moved to make peace.
Okay.
And they did it, I think, 4 days after the invasion.
Okay, so we're back in February now. Of
Yeah,
2022.
2022. And then they did again, and then they did again. And at one point, it looked like, I believe it was March, so not very long into the war, I believe that it was going to go well, and they were going to get these regions recognized, and they were going to promise not to go to NATO. They were going to plot. It was a whole thing. But the United States sent Boris Johnson, who was Prime Minister of England at the time, down there to tell Ukraine, no, don't take the deal. Because it's in the interest of the West that this proxy war continues.
And why is it in their interest?
It's in their interest because any type of war that Russia's in is going to deplete Russian resources.
Okay.
And it's the opposite for us. When we're in a war, we increase resources. Because of the way the Federal Reserve works and that they're just pretending that money exists, they need a reason to pretend that it exists, though.
Oh, okay. We're talking about getting more money out of the Fed.
Right.
Okay.
Like, they're like, we want, say just, I'm just going to make up numbers. Say they want $1 trillion more to exist to go into corrupt hands, but they need somebody to come to them and say, would you loan me $1 trillion? Why? I guess I got
Ukraine.
Oh, I got a reason. Ukraine. Okay, sure. We'll loan it to you. Sure. Take it all. It's just numbers on a book. It doesn't even matter. And the Americans will pay for it with inflation. It's cool until their economy collapses. So, whereas if you have a legitimate economy like Russia, there's actual resources being depleted. There's actually tanks being destroyed. We don't care if tanks are destroyed. We can just make up more numbers to go to Lockheed Martin to pump some more planes out or just whatever. So, yeah, that's what I got. I just think it's so silly, the whole flag thing.
So we've contributed, what is it, 40 or 60 billion dollars have gone to Ukraine?
We're at 100 right now.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
But, okay. Yeah. Okay. You know it's not really going there, though.
It's been allotted toward, like, for resources and that type of thing?
So I think like 30-something billion have gone there, and the rest is just a huge slush fund.
Okay.
So we can just, whatever we want.
What was that story from the last couple of weeks that they've found some missing money in the Department of Defense or something like that?
I didn't know they've ever done that before.
Oh,
I know they've lost a lot of money. I don't.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. Like, there's money, like the books don't add up, and.
Oh, okay. So that was from like the Rogan show.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Okay, yeah. They were saying that they failed. The Department of Defense failed their 5th audit in a row, and they only were able to track 40% of the funds during that period, and it's like $7 trillion.
Right.
Is what they could track, which means there was over $9 trillion that was untracked in that period.
Right.
And the period has to be over years because that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And there's just no accountability whatsoever.
Right.
But
But we're talking about slush funds and just
Right.
yeah. This isn't Ukraine is small potatoes ultimately in the overall
Right.
scheme of things, but it helps. It gives them a vehicle to move the money around.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay.
The story first broke, it's like February of last year, and this is going down, and it's like, man, this doesn't look right. Honestly, I don't know any of these things that we're talking about right now, but let's see. The government says we should support Ukraine. The corporations, the agencies, everybody, the corporate media, everybody says you should support. My hackles are up. I'm suspicious, and I remember I walked in this liquor store, and it was an occasion, and I got my phone out, and the lady's like, "Oh, are you looking to see which vodkas aren't Russian?" And I'm like, "No, I'm looking for one that's Russian." And she said, "Oh." And then she's like, the store, yeah, I guess. And I'm like, okay, well, that's too expensive. Anyway, so I go to check out, and the lady's like, and the lady's looking at me funny. I'm like, well, I figure if the American government really, really wants us to support Ukraine, I'm just guessing I'm not
That's
gonna.
wrong. Yeah.
And she just gave me this look like, you ignorant fool. But it's like,
Right.
she's the ideal citizen is the deal.
100%.
Just sheep it out.
Lockstep in line, and yeah.
Yeah, and I have nothing against her. I do this show for her.
Right.
I want her to watch it. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. She's not going to watch it. But I'm just saying, ever. But we want people to think for themselves, for goodness sakes.
Right.
It could be one time they come up with the next Ukraine, and it's like, nah, yeah, we really will support it. Could be, probably not. Probably never. But
Has there, in your lifetime, been a legitimate cause that you, based on research that you've done, we're like, yeah, we should have supported that? No? Yeah, I can't think of one.
Not one. The only one in the history of the United States that I have a suspicion might be a good thing, and that's, I don't even know the details, but the Korean War.
Oh, okay.
Just because I see the difference between South Korea and North Korea right now. And I know that South Korea would be like North Korea if we lost, and those people would be oppressed and famine and blah, blah, blah. And that's the only war. We probably still shouldn't have went over there. There were probably nefarious means for going over there. But it's one where at the end you can look at the results and be like, I'm happy for the South Korean people.
Okay.
It's the only one I can think of ever.
Right.
In the history of, and that's a long history. Right?
Yeah.
250 years, for goodness sakes. Anyways. That's
okay. Just going back, I got one more question. So all this money, $30-40 billion worth of resources has gone to them. So it's going to Zelensky, and he's just giving the military who doesn't follow orders anyway more military assets? That seems insane.
Okay, so Zelensky is, so let's not talk about Biden. Let's leave Biden out of this.
Yeah.
Zelensky's the biggest puppet in the entire world.
Right. Oh, yeah, definitely.
He's a Jewish fellow. He was an actor who played a show where he's president. Now he's president. He films his little green things. People think, wow, he's on the front lines. He goes to the Grammys. The whole thing is just ridiculous.
Right, totally.
So I just don't think he has a say. I'm sure he's getting a decent cut.
Okay.
But I doubt he's going to live through it, honestly.
Okay. But I mean, like the billions of dollars, it is going to their military. So it's just about perpetuating the war from our side.
Yeah, kind of. But then it's also just getting smuggled out of the country because they're selling it.
Oh, okay.
It's just getting smuggled en masse out of the country, and they've got this new bill in Congress, or it's like a proposal or whatever, I don't know, where it's like we need to kind of track the money. And everybody's like, we don't know where it's going. We don't know.
Yeah. Is that something we do?
Yeah, and then it's like there's so many silly things happen. Like we sent them these artillery pieces, but they didn't have the targeting chips. Mm-hmm. So they just couldn't really work.
Oh, okay.
But they've got this big hunk of nice looking metal. It's just so defies logic.
Right.
All the things. And there's homeless people sleeping on the street tonight.
Right.
And there's people who houses got foreclosed and who lost their jobs or who need training to get. There's so many things for money that here, border protection.
So even if the Ukraine, we go through all this and our conclusion is, yeah, we should be sending or they're worthy of help, shouldn't you still help your own people first? Shouldn't that always be the priority?
Well, I mean, there could be a people who's in a more, I agree with you, but there could be people who's in imminent threat of danger,
Okay.
Like if, say we were neutral in World War II, and then we saw the Allies genociding the Germans, And the Germans said, hey, could you come help us? They just dropped firebombs last night and killed 100,000 men, women, and children, mostly women and children. It was a refugee city in Dresden.
Wait, this really happened?
This really happened.
Oh, wow.
Worse than the atomic bombs. Can you come help us? We could say, okay, Great Depression kind of sucks here. They just murdered 100,000 people. Let's send all of our planes and just blow up England because they're committing a genocide, you know? Or we could just join England and Eisenhower could make his death camps and kill millions of Germans.
Okay.
They could just do that strategy.
Gotcha. That sounds better.
But I'm just saying there are situations where like a threat
Okay.
is severely imminent.
Gotcha.
Like 100,000 people dying in one night.
Right.
Just imagine.
Yeah.
It's impossible to imagine.
Do we have any realistic numbers about deaths over the course of the 8 or 9 years, whatever, that's been going on in Ukraine? Do we know?
Yeah, so the numbers are just so varied, honestly.
Okay.
I just don't trust any of it.
Right.
And then after the war, they'll be the victor. It'll be Russia. And then they're going to produce a bunch of numbers, and I'm not going to believe them. I'm just not going to believe them.
Okay.
I think a certain amount of decades has to pass until, you know.
Right. Things get declassified or people write books or whatever.
And the necessary for propaganda is lessened. So people
Right.
can actually come out and critically analyze the numbers, and then you can kind of get honest.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha. So, very interesting backstory here to the Ukraine and what's going on over there. It's up to you to figure out what side you land on. Then there doesn't have to be picking one side. Oh, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. They can both be bad guys, and you don't have to support anyone. But this is just encouraging you to think about it. And again, we've said this so many times. When you see the government and the media and social media, and all at once a switch is flipped, and everybody's got Ukrainian flags, and everyone's saying stand with Ukraine. You're getting banned from social media if you say anything opposite. That's probably the wrong thing. And just make that your default, and you're going to be right way more often than you're wrong. So hopefully you're learning the lesson. You can apply it to your life. Hope we'll see you next time.